The betting pool started as a joke. It was Ren who suggested it, Ren being the Orvan's Path's chief engineer, a squat four-armed Belosi with oil-stained fingers and a talent for finding humor in situations that did not obviously contain any. The new human cargo specialist had been on the ship for exactly 9 hours, and Ren had already decided she was going to be a problem. Not a dangerous problem, a fragile one. 17 days to the Drevath run, Ren announced to the common area, where 3 of the 6 crew members were eating their evening meal. I'm giving the human 11 before she requests a transfer. Yola, the ship's communications officer, a tall Sarathi with silver-gray skin and 4 vocal cords that she used 2 of regularly and the other 2 never, looked up from her bowl. That's generous. I'm an optimist, Ren said. Breck, who operated the ship's external maintenance rigs and had the philosophical outlook of someone who spent a lot of time alone in space hanging off the outside of a hull, said, "What's the prize?" "Locker 18, Ren said. "Whoever's closest gets full claim. I've had my eye on the extra storage space for 2 years. Yola said 7 days. Breck said 14. Nas, the ship's medic, a Grethian, which meant he was small and gray and spoke so quietly that you always felt you were about to miss something important, said nothing, which everyone took as abstention. The human's name was Sira. She was from a place on Earth called the Faroe Islands, which none of them had heard of, and she had arrived with a duffel bag and a tool roll, and an expression of complete, focused calm that Ren had initially mistaken for confidence, but was increasingly thinking might be something else entirely. Something older than confidence. Confidence was something you built. Whatever Sira had looked like it had been there since before she knew she had it. She was currently in the cargo bay. She had been in the cargo bay since she arrived, reorganizing the freight stacking system into a configuration that was apparently standard on human-operated vessels, but which their ship's AI had flagged as non-regulation. Ren had gone down twice to explain that their current system worked fine. Both times, Sira had listened politely, agreed that it worked fine, and then explained, without any particular urgency, that her system would prevent compressive failure in the outer freight wall if they experienced a lateral impact above 3G. She had shown Ren the math. Ren did not have a good response to the math. She had gone back upstairs both times. She showed me impact stress calculations, Ren told the table, for a scenario we have never encountered. Did the calculations check out? Nas asked very quietly. Ren paused. That's not the point. Breck said, sounds like the point. The captain of the Orvan's Path was a Drevath named Goss. He was not in the common area because he was on the bridge running approach calculations for their first waypoint, but he had heard about the betting pool through the ship's internal comm network, which he was technically not supposed to monitor for personal conversations, but which he absolutely monitored for personal conversations, because 30 years of captaincy had convinced him it was the fastest way to understand his crew. He had not participated in the pool. He had also not shut it down, which was as close to encouragement as Goss ever got. What Goss had done privately was look up the Faroe Islands. He had spent 20 minutes reading about them. Small islands in the North Atlantic Ocean of Earth. Population, historically dependent on fishing in some of the most volatile coastal waters on the planet. Regular storm systems capable of waves 18 meters in height. Fog so thick ships navigated by sound for days at a time. A tradition of open-boat ocean rowing, human-powered, no engine, that went back further than most galactic civilizations had been writing things down. He had also looked up what the Faroe Islands ate, which was mostly things they had caught themselves in the above-described ocean. He read all of this, and then he went back to his navigation calculations, and he did not tell anyone what he had found because he was the captain and part of the job was knowing things the crew did not know yet and letting events do the teaching. On day 2, Sira finished the cargo bay reorganization and moved on to the secondary coolant lines in engineering, which had a slow pressure leak that Ren had been monitoring and managing for 6 weeks, because the repair required someone with smaller hands than Ren's 4 to get into the housing properly. Sira looked at the housing for 4 minutes, asked Ren 2 questions about the pressure specifications, borrowed a specific tool she named by a number Ren had to look up in the manual, and fixed the leak in 40 minutes. Ren updated the bedding pool to 9 days. On day 3, the ship received a navigation advisory from the Galactic Route Authority. A section of their planned corridor had been flagged, debris field from a recent collision between 2 unmanned freight drones, spread across a volume of space that would take 16 hours to navigate around. The detour would push them past their delivery window and trigger a penalty fee that would eat most of the profit from the run. Goss pulled the crew together in the common area. He laid out the options. Around the debris field, safe, slow, expensive. Through the debris field, faster, cheaper, and only possible if the external maintenance rigs could be run continuously to clear a path, which meant someone operating the rigs from outside the ship for approximately 9 hours straight in a debris field with irregular fragment trajectories. Ren said that was not a comfortable proposition. Breck, whose job it was, said it was technically possible, but he had never run continuous rig operations for 9 hours because the physical strain on the operator was considerable. The rig harness transferred impact feedback directly to the body, and 9 hours of repeated micro-impacts added up. Sira, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, said, "I'll run second shift on the rigs if Breck runs first." Breck looked at her. He was twice her mass and had been operating external rigs for 11 years. "You're certified on external rig systems." "Certified and rated for Class 3 debris," Sira said. "I ran sea salvage rigs for 4 years before I went into space. Different environment, same operator mechanics." Breck looked at Ren. Ren looked at the table. "Sea salvage," Yola said slowly, tasting the words. "In the ocean on Earth." "Off the Faroe coast mostly," Sira said. "The rig feedback is actually gentler up here. The sea doesn't care about impact ratings." Nobody said anything for a moment. Goss said, "We go through the debris field. Breck, Sira, work out the shift handover protocol. I want a safety margin of 40 minutes between operators." He stood and went back to the bridge. Behind him, he heard Ren very quietly tell Yola that she was revising her estimate to 15 days. Goss allowed himself a small, private expression that was not quite a smile and was not quite something else, and went back to his navigation calculations. The betting pool, he had decided, was going to run a very long time. The debris field was worse than the route advisory had described. This was not unusual. Route advisories were written by automated systems that measured debris fields from a distance and estimated fragment density using scatter pattern modeling. What the modeling did not account for was the fact that the 2 freight drones that had collided had been carrying compressed gas canisters, and compressed gas canisters, when ruptured in vacuum, did not stay in the collision zone. They drifted. Slowly, unpredictably, end over end, leaking frozen vapor trails that showed up on short-range sensors as ghost contacts. Every few minutes, a new one would drift across the ship's path, and the sensor system would flag it as a possible fragment, and Yola would have to verify it manually and reroute. Breck operated the external rigs for the first 4 hours. He was good at it, methodical and precise, clearing fragments ahead of the ship's path with controlled bursts from the rig's cutting arm. He came back inside at the 4-hour mark with his hands shaking slightly from the sustained feedback load, and his shoulder joints aching in a way he reported to Nas as routine. Nas looked at his shoulder readout, said something very quietly that included the word rest, and gave him a recovery pack. Sira was already suited up. Yola watched her run through the pre-exit checklist on the rig console, a checklist that Yola had seen Breck complete dozens of times and that most operators moved through by muscle memory. Sira moved through it differently. She was not faster. She was more thorough. She read each item instead of assuming it, checked each confirmation instead of accepting the visual indicator. When she got to the tether integrity check, she ran it twice. "You always double-check the tether?" Yola asked. Sira looked at her. "On sea salvage rigs, if your tether fails, the ocean takes you. We double-check." Yola did not have a response to this. She confirmed the airlock was clear, and Sira went out. What Sira did with the external rig was not what Breck had done with it. Breck's approach was linear: clear the path directly ahead, move with the ship, maintain a stable corridor. It was effective and correct, and it was how external rig operation was taught. Sira did something different. She ran the rig in an expanding sweep pattern, clearing not just the immediate path but the volume around the ship's projected course 40 seconds ahead. She was clearing problems before they became problems. Ren, watching the rig telemetry from engineering, noticed this after about 20 minutes. "She's changed the sweep pattern," Ren said to no one in particular. "Is it working?" Goss asked from the bridge comm. Ren looked at the fragment impact counter, which tracked debris strikes on the hull. In Breck's 4-hour shift, there had been 11 minor hull impacts, nothing damaging but logged. In Sira's first 30 minutes, there had been 0. "Yes," Ren said, "it's working." "Then leave her alone," Goss said and cut the comm. 2 hours into Sira's shift, a gas canister drifted into the rig's operating range from below the ship's ventral axis. A direction the sensor sweep had not flagged, because the canister was cold enough to read as background noise. It hit the rig's secondary arm at a relative velocity that transmitted a spike through the operator feedback system. On the impact readout, it registered as a force equivalent to being struck in the ribs by something heavy. Yola winced when she saw the number. Sira's voice came over comms 30 seconds later. "Canister strike on the secondary arm. Arm is functional. I'm continuing." "Are you injured?" Yola asked. A brief pause. "I've cracked a rib before. This is bruising. I'm continuing." Yola looked at the feedback number again. Then she looked at the rig camera feed, where Sira was already back to her sweep pattern, moving with the same rhythm as before. The conversation in the common area that evening, after the debris field had been cleared and the ship was back on its primary route, ahead of schedule by 2 hours, was quieter than usual. Ren was there. Breck was there, his shoulder still aching. Yola. Nas, who had quietly treated Sira's bruised ribs during the post-exit medical check and had added 4 lines to his running medical log without saying anything to anyone yet. Ren said, "She changed the sweep pattern." Nobody responded. Ren said, "The pattern she used, I looked it up after. It's a technique from deep ocean salvage operations. Humans developed it for working around wreck sites with unpredictable current behavior. They adapted it for debris field use independently, apparently some years ago. It's in a human rig operator manual." Ren paused. "It is not in our manual." Breck said, "Should it be?" Ren did not answer immediately. She had been Ren the engineer for 22 years, and she was good at her job, and she knew it. She was not a person who was easily impressed, and she was especially not a person who liked being impressed by someone who had been on her ship for 3 days. "She took a feedback strike that would have ended most operators' shift," Breck said. He was not saying it critically. He was saying it the way a person says a thing they have been sitting with for a while and need to put outside themselves. "The ocean doesn't care about impact ratings," Yola said, quoting Sira back at them. Ren looked at her hands. They were good hands, 4 of them, strong, experienced. She thought about what it meant to grow up somewhere the environment itself was trying to remove you from the gene pool, and to go to work in it anyway every day, until the feedback of a debris strike felt like bruising and not like a reason to stop. She updated the betting pool in her head. She had said 9 days. She was starting to think Goss was going to win by default, because Goss had not entered a number at all, and she was starting to understand why. At the far end of the ship, Nas sat in the medical bay and looked at his notes. He had not said much today, which was normal, but he had thought a great deal, which was also normal. He added a final line to his log. Operator continued full-function rig work for additional 3 hours following significant impact feedback event. Recommend baseline recalibration of human pain tolerance parameters in crew medical reference. Current parameters appear to be incorrect. He saved the file. He turned off the light. He sat in the dark for a moment before going to sleep, thinking about a small set of islands in a large, cold ocean, and the kind of people those islands had produced, and what it meant that 4,000 of them were scattered across the outer ring right now doing jobs that the galactic database had decided they were not suited for. He thought about it for a long time. Then he went to sleep, because unlike Sira, he was not from the Faroe Islands and he needed the rest. On day 6, Yola tried to teach Sira a card game. This was Yola's way of doing things she actually wanted to do under cover of doing something generous for someone else. She genuinely wanted to play Drevath Sequence, a game she was very good at, and she had decided that teaching Sira was a reasonable excuse to do it while also, technically, being friendly to the new crew member. 2 goals, 1 activity. Efficient. Sira learned the rules in 4 minutes. She won the 3rd game. "You've played this before," Yola said. "No," Sira said, "but it's similar in structure to a card game from home. Different suits, same underlying logic." Yola looked at her cards. She had been playing Drevath Sequence for 11 years. "What game?" "It's called poker," Sira said. "Humans play it for money usually." "What does winning look like in poker?" Sira thought about it. "You either have the best hand, or you convince everyone else you do." Yola was quiet for a moment, reassessing several things at once. "That is a very human game," she said finally. Sira smiled. "We've been told." The Drevath run was supposed to be routine. 14 waypoints, 11 freight drops, a final delivery to a fuel processing station at the edge of the mapped sector. Goss had done this run 6 times. Nothing about it was supposed to be interesting. On day 8, it became interesting. The ship received a distress signal from a small independent cargo hauler called the Teth Marrow, which had lost primary propulsion and was drifting with a crew of 3 toward a gravity gradient that would eventually, in about 19 hours, make their situation considerably worse. They were too far from the nearest port for a tow. They had emergency power and life support, and a very specific kind of nothing else. Goss calculated the detour, 2 hours off their route. He pulled the crew together, told them the situation, told them the detour plan, and asked if anyone had a reason to object. Nobody objected. This was normal. The law of the space lanes was the law of the space lanes. You helped when you could. What was not normal was what happened when Goss asked Ren how long a propulsion transfer repair would take. Ren said 4 hours minimum. They could patch the Teth Marrow's primary drive with components from their own reserve system, but it was a complex job with limited external access on a vessel she had never worked on before. Sira said, "Do you have the Teth Marrow's technical registry?" Goss looked at her. "Yes." "Can I see the propulsion housing schematics?" Goss sent them to her tab. Sira looked at them for 3 minutes. Then she said, "The housing design is a Veth-Sarathi hybrid system. I worked on these during my salvage years. We pulled 3 of this type out of the deep ocean off the northern islands. Same access problem, different medium." She looked at Ren. "If I work the external access points and you work the internal relay system, I think we can do it in 2.5 hours. Ren looked at the schematics, then at Sira, then at the schematics again. "You've repaired this housing type before." "Underwater," Sira said. "In a current, with a time limit before the tide came back." Ren had no answer to that. She told Goss 2.5 hours was probably accurate. The repair took 2 hours and 10 minutes. What Ren did not say to anyone at the time, because she was Ren and she processed things internally before she said them, was that Sira worked in a way she had never seen before. Not faster, not stronger, different. When they hit an unexpected problem at the 40-minute mark, a secondary junction that had fused to its housing from heat damage and would not release cleanly, Ren had started calculating how much time the workaround would cost. Sira had looked at the fused junction for approximately 15 seconds, reached into her tool roll, pulled out a tool that Ren did not recognize, and applied it to the junction housing in a way that was absolutely not in any technical manual Ren had ever read. The junction came free. "What is that tool?" Ren asked. "It's called a FID," Sira said, already moving to the next access point. "Old maritime tool. Sail riggers used them on Earth for centuries. I modified one for mechanical work." Ren looked at the tool. It was simple, elegant, deeply old. The kind of tool that existed because someone a very long time ago had a problem and solved it, and the solution was so good that nobody had ever found a reason to improve it. Ren added it to the mental list she had been building, without quite admitting to herself that she was building it. The crew of the Teth Marrow came out to watch the final stages of the repair through their external cameras. Their captain, a young Belosi with clean engineer's hands and anxious eyes, sent a transmission to Goss when it was done. "Your team is exceptional," he said, "particularly the human." Goss said thank you. He cut the transmission and looked at his crew. Ren was wiping down her tools. Sira was securing the external access panels on the Teth Marrow's hull with the same thorough check-twice approach she applied to everything. Breck and Yola were watching her through the viewport. Breck said, "I looked up poker." "We all looked up poker," Yola said. "The bluffing part," Breck said. "The convincing everyone you have a good hand when you don't. Do you think she does that, in general?" Yola thought about it. "I think she does the opposite," she said slowly. "I think she actually has a very good hand and nobody knows it yet." Goss said nothing. He went back to the bridge. The betting pool, Locker 18, claimed by whoever guessed closest to the day Sira requested a transfer, had not been updated in 3 days because nobody could agree anymore on what number to put down. Ren had quietly stopped updating her estimate. Breck had never put in a firm number. Yola was rethinking hers. Only Nas had been right from the start in his way. He had said nothing. He had not put in a number. He had, it turned out, been the only one paying close enough attention to know there was no number to put in. On day 11, Ren lost the betting pool. Not because Sira had requested a transfer, she had not, and it was becoming increasingly clear she was not going to, but because Goss had quietly dissolved the pool himself and told Ren to give everyone their credits back. He had done this without explanation, and Ren had not asked for one, because she was starting to understand the shape of things. What she understood was this: you did not bet against something you did not understand, and none of them had understood Sira. They still did not fully, but they understood enough now to know the bet had been wrong from the beginning. Day 11 was also the day the Drevath run stopped being routine. They were 6 hours from their 9th freight drop when the ship's external sensor array flagged a contact that was not a debris fragment, not a gas canister, and not a registered vessel on any route the navigation system could identify. It was moving, not fast, slower than most commercial traffic, but with a directional consistency that ruled out drift. Something was out there and it was going somewhere. Goss pulled up the contact. The sensor profile was wrong in several ways that he did not immediately like. Wrong mass for its apparent volume. Wrong heat signature for its apparent propulsion type. No transponder, which was either a malfunction or a deliberate choice, and neither option was comfortable. "Yola," he said, "open frequencies, standard hail." Yola ran the hail on 7 channels. No response. Goss ran the contact profile through the ship's identification database. The database gave him 3 possible matches, all of them flagged vessels, ships that had been impounded, reported stolen, or otherwise removed from legal operation. He looked at the three options for a long moment and did not like any of them. Ren, who had been watching the sensor data from engineering, came up to the bridge. "That mass profile," she said. "Something's in the outer cargo housing. Heavy. More than the ship's registered freight capacity." Goss knew what that meant. The outer ring had a specific and well-documented problem with vessels carrying unregistered mass, and the specific and well-documented problem was that unregistered mass was often the kind of thing that people paid large amounts of money to move quietly. "They see us," Yola said. "Contact has changed bearing, adjusting toward us." That was also not something Goss liked. "Options," he said. Ren said, "If they're moving toward us deliberately, they've decided we're either a threat or an opportunity. We're a cargo hauler, not a threat, so we're an opportunity," Goss said. "Or a witness," Ren said. Goss thought about his crew. Ren, Breck, Yola, Nas, all experienced. None of them combat trained. The Orvan's path had a standard cargo hauler defensive package, hull plating, a proximity deterrent array that could discourage but not stop a serious approach, and that was all. He thought about the math. Then he said, without particular enthusiasm, "Sira." Sira had been in the cargo bay doing inventory and appeared on the bridge within 90 seconds. Goss showed her the contact. He showed her the mass profile. He showed her the bearing change. He did not editorialize. He just showed her the data and waited. She looked at it for a while, long enough that Ren started to wonder if she was going to say something reassuring or something honest. Then Sira said, "They're not going to move fast until they're close enough to bracket us. That gives us about 20 minutes. 20 minutes to do what?" Breck asked from the doorway. "To make ourselves not worth the trouble," Sira said. She turned to Goss. "Can you run the ship dark? Full emission reduction, engines to minimum hold, all active sensors off, transponder on emergency-only broadcast." "We'd be nearly blind," Goss said. "So would they," Sira said. "I'll need the external rig and Ren." Ren said, "For what?" "The proximity deterrent array," Sira said. "What's its effective range?" 800 meters. It's a pressure wave emitter. Makes approach uncomfortable for small vessels. It's not a weapon." "It's not a weapon by itself," Sira said. "What's in Bay 3? Ren blinked. "Pressurized ore concentrate, 40 canisters, Class 2. "And the ship goes dark in 20 minutes, Sira said. "Which means they'll be navigating by passive sensors and memory. They'll know where we were. They won't know what's between them and us." Goss was quiet. He was looking at Sira the way he had looked at the sensor data, carefully, without rushing. "You want to place the canisters." "Between us and them," Sira said. "In the dark, using the rig." She paused. "If they push through the deterrent array, the pressure wave will disturb the canisters. Moving unpressurized canisters in a debris profile at approach speed is not a comfortable experience for a ship's hull." Another pause. "And if they're using passive thermal imaging, 40 cold canisters in a loose field read as debris, they won't know what they are until they're in them." Ren looked at Goss. Goss looked at Sira. "You've done something like this before," Goss said. It was not a question. Everything with Sira was not a question by now. "Fishing boats," she said. "Off the islands. When the larger vessels came too close to the grounds. Different environment. Same principle, you use what you have, you use the water, you make yourself less interesting than the problem." She paused. "Space doesn't have currents, but it has the dark, and that's better." Goss made the decision in about 4 seconds. "Ren, help her prep the canisters. Yola, start the emission reduction sequence on my mark. Breck," he looked at Breck. "Stay off the comms unless I ask for you." Breck nodded. He was very good at staying off the comms. 15 minutes later, Sira was outside in the rig, moving 40 pressurized ore canisters into a loose field between the ship and the approaching contact, in the dark, with the precision of someone who had spent years placing gear in moving water without losing it. Ren watched the rig telemetry and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, to no one in particular, "The fishing boats off the islands. She used this to protect the fishing grounds." Nas, who had come to stand in the doorway, said very quietly, "Yes." "How many times?" Nas said, "I read a history of the Faroe Islands during the approach to the debris field. It did not have a specific number." He paused. "It had the word centuries." The contact slowed at 400 meters. It sat there for 6 minutes. Then it changed bearing again, away from them, and accelerated back toward whatever route it had come from. They never found out what was in the outer cargo housing. They did not need to know. Sira came back inside at the 2-hour mark. She returned the rig to its dock, locked it down with the same double check she always used, and filed a maintenance log for the canisters that were now slowly drifting in a loose field 1,200 meters off their starboard side and would need to be recovered. She came to the bridge, looked at the now empty sensor screen and said, "We should recover the canisters before we continue. I can do it in one more rig run." Goss said, "Take Breck." "I don't need." "Take Breck," Goss said, and his tone was the tone of a captain who was not arguing, and also the tone of a man who was, for the first time in this entire conversation, genuinely concerned about someone. Not about the mission, about a person. Sira looked at him. Something moved in her face, recognition maybe. She said, "Okay." She went to find Breck. Ren, alone in engineering, deleted the betting pool entirely. Locker 18 could stay empty. Some things did not deserve a prize. Breck asked her about the fishing boats on the way back from the canister recovery. He had been working up to it for the entire 2-hour rig run, which Sira had completed efficiently and without drama, and which Breck had assisted with in the way that a person assists when they are technically capable, but are also privately aware that they are the less skilled operator in the pair. He was fine with this. Breck had a settled relationship with his own abilities and their limits. What he did not have was a settled relationship with the question that had been sitting in his chest since Ren had said the word centuries in engineering. "The fishing," he said when they were back in the airlock cycling the pressure. "You were protecting the grounds from the larger vessels." Sira pulled off her helmet. Her hair was damp from the suit. "The islands have been fishing the same waters for over 1,000 years," she said. "The larger commercial operations were newer. They came in with bigger nets and no particular concern for whether there was anything left afterward. And the fishing boats went out to stop them." "Some of them," Sira said. "Not all. The ones that did were not large, not fast." She put her helmet in the rack. "But they knew the water. The large commercial vessels did not. The water it changes. It has moods. If you know them and they don't, that's something." Breck thought about this. He was a large person, strong, with years of external rig work that had given him a practical relationship with the physics of space. He had always thought of size and speed as the primary variables in any confrontation with difficult conditions. He was reconsidering this. "The space between us and that contact," he said. "When you placed the canisters, you knew exactly how they'd drift." "I estimated," Sira said. "Based on our emission output, the local thermal variance, the contact's last known bearing. You can't know exactly. You make the best estimate you can and you trust it. And if the estimate is wrong..." She looked at him evenly. "Then you make a different choice faster than they make the same mistake." She paused. "That's also from the fishing." They went back into the ship. The crew was in the common area, and something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, the quality of ease that existed between people who had been through something together and come out the other side. Goss was there, which was unusual. He ate most of his meals on the bridge. Tonight he was sitting at the common table with a drink he was not drinking, and when Sira and Breck came in, he looked at Sira for a long moment before he said anything. What he said was, "I looked up the Faroe Islands before you came aboard." Sira sat down. She looked at him steadily. When I received your assignment file," Goss said. "I always research crew origins. It tells me things that files don't. What did it tell you? Goss turned his drink in his shell-plated hands. That the islands have survived every empire, every larger nation, every economic pressure, every storm and famine and ocean condition that should have, by several reasonable assessments, made them uninhabitable. That the people who live there made a decision, a very long time ago, to stay, and then built an entire culture around being good enough at staying that nothing could make them leave. He paused. I also looked up persistence hunting. Sira raised an eyebrow. Humans ran prey animals to exhaustion, Goss said, over the course of full days, on foot, in heat that would be classified as a health risk for most other species. We don't do that anymore, Sira said, which was what she had told Pell and which was still technically true. You also do not need to, Goss said. You already have the endurance built in. You do not need to hunt that way, you just have it. The common area was quiet. Yola had stopped pretending to read. Ren had stopped pretending to eat. Even Nas, who was usually present only in the most ambient sense, was visibly paying attention. Sira said, "What made you accept my assignment without reviewing my ratings first?" Goss said, "I did review your ratings." "They're not exceptional," Sira said. It was not self-deprecation. It was a straight fact, and she delivered it as one. Mid-range certifications, decent technical scores, nothing that would stand out. "No," Goss agreed. "But you had worked sea salvage for 4 years, in the Faroe waters, and your incident report record over those 4 years was 0. Sira waited. 0 incidents in 4 years of sea salvage in one of the most difficult coastal environments on your planet, Goss said. Not because nothing happened. Things always happen. 0 incidents because you responded correctly every time. That is not a certification score. That is judgment." He looked at her. "Judgment is the thing that cannot be taught on a course." Yola said very quietly, "I want to learn poker properly." Everyone looked at her. She looked back unapologetic. Not just the rules, the real version, where you learn to read the other players. Sira looked at Yola for a moment, then at the table of faces around her. Ren, who had deleted a betting pool she was embarrassed she had started. Breck, who had worked a rig shift alongside her and come back with a different understanding of what partnership looked like. Nas, who had not said a word tonight and whose silence felt completely different from the silence of his first day. Goss, who had looked up her home before she arrived and kept what he found to himself until she had earned the telling. "Okay," Sira said, "after dinner." She got up to get food. Nobody said anything while she was at the counter. When she came back and sat down, Ren said, "I'm sorry about the pool." Sira looked at her. "What pool?" Ren explained, briefly, with slightly less dignity than usual. Sira listened, then she said, "Locker 18, what's in it now?" "Nothing," Ren said. "It's been empty for 2 years. I just wanted the storage space." "Then give it to Breck," Sira said. "He has more gear than anyone and his locker is a safety violation." Breck, who had been hoping no one would bring this up, said nothing. Ren looked at Sira for a long moment with the expression of a person who has been caught being small and is not sure yet if they are going to be forgiven or just quietly made to feel the size of what they did. Then she decided from Sira's face that neither of those things was happening, that Sira had simply done the math on Breck's gear problem and come up with the most efficient solution, and the pool had been mentioned only because the question was asked. "Breck," Ren said, "Locker 18 is yours." Breck said, "Thank you." He looked at Sira, "Thank you." Sira was already eating. "You had it coming," she said. "You held that rig line for 4 hours in a debris field with a bad shoulder and didn't say a word about it." Breck had no answer to that. He ate his dinner. Everyone ate their dinner. Outside, the stars moved past in their slow and ancient way. Later, Sira taught Yola poker. Ren sat in after the first hand and did not admit she was playing. Goss watched from the doorway for 10 minutes and then went back to the bridge, and the expression on his face on the way out was one that nobody saw, which was fortunate, because it was a very soft expression for a Drevath captain who had been doing this job for 30 years and thought he had stopped being surprised. He had been wrong about that. He was glad to have been wrong. The Drevath run ended at Drevath Station on day 17, which was the day Wren had originally given as her estimate for Sira's transfer request. There was no transfer request. There was, instead, a completed delivery manifest, a zero-incident run report, a maintenance log that Wren had been quietly using as a reference document for the past week, and a formal crew performance review filed by Goss that was, by the standards of Goss's written output, extraordinarily long. Goss was not a writer. He wrote in the minimum words required by regulation and stopped there. His performance reviews were typically 3 sentences. Sira's was 4 paragraphs. He did not tell anyone how long it was. He submitted it to the Galactic Trade Council's crew registry and moved on. What happened next was not something Goss had planned. The Trade Council's crew registry was a bureaucratic system that processed tens of thousands of performance reviews per month. It was not designed to flag individual reviews. It was designed to aggregate data and produce periodic reports on crew performance trends across species and route categories. Goss's review went in as one of tens of thousands. It came out differently. The registry's pattern analysis system, which operated in the background and which nobody checked very often, flagged the review not because of what it said about Sira specifically, but because of what it said in combination with 43 other reviews of human crew members filed over the previous 18 months. The registry had been noticing something for a while, a quiet accumulation of performance data that did not match the species baseline the system used as a reference. It had been noting the discrepancy without escalating it, because the discrepancy was never large enough in any single case to cross the alert threshold. Goss's review pushed the aggregate past the threshold. An automated alert went to the Trade Council's Data Standards Division. The Data Standards Division, which was staffed by 3 Veth analysts who were very thorough and very bored, looked at the flag and started pulling the raw data. They spent 2 days going through it. Then they sent a report to the Trade Council's Senior Operations Committee with a subject line that read, "Systematic discrepancy in human crew performance baseline. Recommend review." The Senior Operations Committee read the report on a Thursday. By Friday, they had forwarded it to the Galactic Information Bureau with a cover note that said, essentially, "We think your numbers are wrong." None of this reached Goss or Sira or anyone on the Orvan's path for another 11 days. They were already on the next run by then. A shorter route, less eventful, though Wren had privately noted that less eventful with Sira aboard meant something different than it used to mean with other crew. What reached them was a message from the Trade Council, not to Goss, to Sira. It said that the Council's data review had identified her performance record as part of a cross-species baseline audit and asked if she would be willing to participate in a voluntary interview for the purpose of updating the Galactic crew performance standards. Sira read this message twice, then she went to find Goss. She handed him the tab. He read it. Then he looked at her over the top of the screen with an expression she had not seen from him before, something that was not quite pride, because Goss did not do pride, but something in the same neighborhood. "They're updating the baseline," he said. "Apparently," she said. "Because of the aggregate data." He handed the tab back. "Not because of any single thing, because enough captains wrote enough reviews that the system finally had enough data to see the pattern." 43 reviews, Sira said. 44, Goss said, including mine. She looked at him. He looked back. It was the kind of silence between people who have been in a small ship together for long enough that they do not need to fill every quiet moment with words. Then Sira said, "What did you write?" Goss was quiet for a moment. He was a man who chose his words carefully because he had a limited supply he was willing to spend on any given thing, and he spent them accordingly. I wrote what I observed, he said. The debris field, the Teth Marrow repair, the contact situation, the way you work, the judgment. He paused. I wrote that the crew registry baseline for humans appeared to have been created without reference to humans who came from places that had shaped them into something the baseline's architects had not imagined. Another pause. I also wrote that in 30 years of captaining cargo vessels, I have never had a crew member who responded to every situation with exactly the right amount of force and exactly the right kind of solution, and no more than that. No drama, no excess, just the correct action for the problem. He looked at her steadily. That is not a skill you learn. That is the result of a very long time in a very hard place. Sira was quiet for a moment. Outside the viewport, the stars moved past them in their slow, indifferent way. The Faroe Islands, she said. Among other places, Goss said. There are humans from every coast on Earth serving in the Outer Ring. 43 other reviews, all of them similar. All of them from crew who came from places where the environment had an opinion about them and they survived it anyway. He paused. The galaxy has been reading the database entry and assigning humans to low-risk cargo work. And the whole time, on every hard route and in every difficult corridor, the ones they actually sent were the ones who were, by any reasonable measure, the most prepared people available. Sira said, "We just did the job." "Yes," Goss said, "that is exactly what you did. That is the entire point." She replied to the Trade Council's message that evening. She said yes to the interview. She did not make it a large thing. She typed the response in about 2 minutes, sent it, and went back to the cargo manifest she had been working on. Wren found out about the baseline audit 3 days later through the General Trade Council Bulletin. She read the summary, which referenced a cross-species review of human crew performance data, and then she sat in engineering for a while, very still, thinking about the betting pool, about Locker 18, about the 9 days she had put down with such confidence, certain that this small human from a set of islands she had never heard of would find the work too much and ask to go somewhere easier. She thought about the debris field, the Teth Marrow repair, the canisters placed in the dark by someone who had spent years learning how to use water and tide and current as tools, and who had simply adapted that knowledge to a new medium without breaking stride. She thought about Sira at the card table, winning the third game without having played before, because the underlying logic was familiar. Then Wren picked up her engineering log and added a note to the maintenance section. It said, "Modified sweep pattern from human sea salvage technique, confirmed effective in Class 2 debris field. Recommend inclusion in standard rig operator manual. See Orvan's path run log, day 3. She saved the file. She went back to work. In a bureau office, someone was writing a new baseline. It would take several months to complete because the data set was large and the analysts were thorough. When it was published, it would not use the word dangerous. It would not use the word exceptional either. It would use precise language, because the Bureau dealt in precise language, and the most precise thing the analysts could find to say. After weeks of data review, 44 crew reports, 1 interview with a cargo specialist from the Faroe Islands, and a great deal of quiet recalibration, was this: humans perform best when the situation is most difficult. This is not coincidence. Plan accordingly. It was the most direct thing the Bureau had ever published. It was also the most accurate. On the Orvan's path, Sira did not read the final report when it came out. She was in the middle of a rig run. She had her hands full. The stars were outside and the work was in front of her, and that was, as far as she was concerned, exactly enough.